Hey y'all. Today, I'm going to talk about bad habits. The scope of this video goes a bit beyond just Wagner, so it'll be a bit longer than others. I'll start by defining what a bad habit is from my point of view. A bad habit is an automatic action with no applied purpose that prevents you from making proper choices. The scope of bad habits can go beyond an individual set of inputs. A bad habit can even be a detrimental thought process. In other words, a bad habitual thought process can cause you to unconsciously neuter your progress. I'm going to use overheads on netplay as an example. A basic level of frame data knowledge tells us that most standing overheads in UniClear are 26 frame. You may think to yourself, wow, that's really slow, and you would be correct. Opponents can easily stand and block these on reaction, even if they were looking for something else. An overhead in UniClear is not meant to work as a mix-up on its own. The purpose of overheads in UniClear is primarily to crush purple shields, among some other things. In other words, overheads in UniClear are not meant to be used as a high-low. Netplay will trick you in this regard. A player with a results-based thought process may find great success slamming overheads in the added delay of a lot of netplay matches. This thought process leads those players to believe that overheads are better than they are. When these players play locally, they will crumble and discover that netplay led them astray. This is an example of a bad habit being built from a poor mindset. Remember to analyze situations that work for you as well as ones that don't. Be disciplined on netplay because it can and will lie to you. Now let's move on to the good stuff. There are a lot of Wagner-specific bad habits, but before I get started, I want to make something really clear. The following are bad habits because they will return worse and worse results the stronger and stronger your opponents become. The Lil Wag series is designed to get new players started with Wagner and on the path to get as strong as possible. I don't care if some of these things work against weaker players. If your goal is to dominate those weak players, these videos are not for you. It's tempting to use drill to reset pressure because you get plus ranks from using it, as you can see on the left side of the screen. However, leaving any gap at all is easily fuzzied by frame 1 head and vol moves or DP. This window gets even bigger if your opponent shields the follow-up. This essentially forces you to use an instant aerial move in order to keep it gapless, even on shield. However, if that gets shielded, you're left very minus. TLDR, it's out of your favor. Check out the anti-Wag drill document I have linked in the description for more. Another way that new Wagner players over-rely on drill is by using it at the ends of their block strings mid-screen when they didn't have to. The issue with using drill at the end of a block string mid-screen is that if it's blocked, you're forced to spend resources, as drill by itself is -5. If your opponent blocks this drill, you're forced to spend meter, CS, or a sword buff follow-up in order to make yourself safe. Lots of Wagners use this way because they want to beat backdash. If you want to be beating backdash mid-screen, a less costly way to do so would be using charged 214X. This is safer because if the opponent blocks, you may lose your turn, but you were not forced to spend resources. Drill is an occasionally useful way to get in. If you hit them on block, you can spend meter or CS to make it safe. However, this doesn't come without risk. Your opponent can quite easily jump over this, and you will be very punishable. Additionally, opponents will make it whiffable. I'm sure that this has happened to you before. The reason that this is a bad habit is because Wagner players tend to overuse it. Opponents will jump over it, or they will make it whiff, and you will die. A more reliable way to close the distance on your opponent is to utilize dash blocking or assault properly. As a Wagner player, it's important to be able to keep track of what buffs you had before your combo started so that you can decide whether or not you're going to take the same buff during the combo or not. For example, it would be desirable for me to, if I already had sword buff when the combo started, take shield buff so that I can have both buffs after a VO ender. Another bad habit related to taking buffs is always taking the same buff after your enders. Being mindful of which buff you can take after your enders is important because sometimes you want shield and not sword. Always autopiloting 66C into drill follow-up is a waste. After using 66C with sword buff, you have time to determine if it's hit your opponent or if your opponent has blocked it. If it hits your opponent, you can react with drill. If your opponent blocks it, you can react by canceling into force function. This provides you an opportunity to frame trap and leaves you at -2, as well as threatens a frame trap with 214X afterwards. Much better. Buff to 214X is very important for us as Wagner players in neutral. It discourages our opponents from pressing buttons or using projectiles, unless they want to get counter hit by one of our best starters. The moment our opponent hears us get our buff, they'll begin up-backing, backdashing, shielding, doing anything that they can to keep us from taking advantage of that move. The worst mistake that you can make as a Wagner player is immediately and predictably using 214X after you get your buff. It's a very bad habit that lots and lots of Wagner players get because it is so enticing to counter-hit somebody with such a strong starter. If your opponent is doing things like up-backing, backdashing, shielding, all of those kinds of things, they're scared of you using the charged follow-up. So instead, you can abuse those actions by using the shield buff to close in safely, as they will not be pressing buttons or counterplaying something like dash block. The sooner you come to terms with the fact that Wagner has to dash block in neutral, the better off you'll be. Wagner lacks low commitment options beyond the range of her normals. New Wagners often refuse to dash block, causing them to constantly take enormous risks to get in. They drill constantly, always jump around, and randomly slam 66C. These are all bad habits. As we've discussed before, if drill whiffs, it's very bad for you. It's very easy to counterplay somebody who's always jumping, and if your 66C whiffs, you're very minus. This is not a stable way to play the game. As a result, to get closer, Wagner must often dash block to move forward safely. This may sometimes mean that you lose your turn, but that's okay. Blocking is not losing. .660 force function is a special string that you'll be using all of the time as Wagner. If it hits them, it goes into your combo. However, if it's blocked, there's quite a large gap that your opponent can mash you out on. It's a very bad habit to always charge the force function here. You should be mentally prepared to let go if they block it. It'll leave you at -2, and you can potentially frame trap them here as well. 214X into uncharged force function into 214X is a pretty obnoxious string that I'll probably cover in a future video, but a very common bad habit that Wagner players have is that they will always 214X after the force function. Sometimes they'll even make it gapless. The problem is that if you always 214X after this force function, you're committing yourself to use resources to make yourself safe. Force function, as you can see on the left side of the screen, is -2. It's okay to go for the frame trap here, and then end here. You do not always have to 2-on-4x. Always buffing after charged force function is an extremely bad habit that you'll see at all levels of play. The reason that it's bad is because, as you'll be able to see at the left side of the screen, at its best, it's -7 in Vorpal. It's even worse if you take shield buff. Having buff on your force function does not change this, as you can see. You should wait to visually confirm if your force function hit your opponent first before buffing. As you may know, spaced 2-on-4x is plus on block. However, when shielded, it's minus. When dash blocked, it can also be minus. A big mistake that a lot of Wagner players make is autopiloting into 5A or 2A to take another turn, assuming that their 2-on-4x will be plus. Make sure to pay attention to what your opponent does before you press those buttons. And yes, you can react. When using buffed force function on Wake Up, it's quite common for new players to not space their force function. The issue with not spacing your force function on someone's Wake Up is that, unless it is truly meaty, they can wake up and throw you very easily. You can avoid having to make this meaty by simply spacing yourself around the throw. While it's true that 5B is a dominant button, it's not always the best thing to smash post-CS. Reason being, 5B is a dominant button when spaced properly. When it tries to contest buttons within their effective ranges that are faster than 7 frames, it will lose. It's important to keep in mind the range and frame data of your opponent's moves so that you can properly choose when to 5B and when to choose some other option. Blocking and backdashing is fine sometimes too. That just about covers it for this video. This one was long, but I hope it was helpful for you. These are all habits that every Wagner player has to deal with when they first start playing, including myself. Follow the channel for future Lil Wag uploads, and leave a comment if you think I forgot a habit. Please remember to check the description for the anti-Wag drill document for further details on why drill blows cheeks. Seriously, this move fucking sucks. Till next time.